If you've been memorizing a lot of new words, but you just can't seem to remember any of them, you might be doing it wrong. It could be that you have a long list of vocabulary that you collected from some sources, and then you've highlighted them, you've studied them, you've written down the definition. But when it comes to actually using them in the time that matter the most, nothing just comes out. Why is that? Let's talk about that in this video. So the key to remembering is something that I call the 2R, relevance and repetition. So let's talk about relevance. What do I mean by relevant words? So relevant words are basically words that come up in your life, that show up in your life. It could be words about your hobbies, your work, or problems that you're facing. You could be learning a lot of words from your favorite novel or your favorite movies, for instance, but these words that you're learning may not be relevant to you right now as a software developer in your company. Let's say you've learned words like giraffe or Dungeons and Dragons, and these might be words that are interesting, that are fun to you, but it's not relevant enough to what you currently need. And if you have an urgent goal to become more fluent at work, then you're gonna have to put these words aside and focus on words that you will actually use. If let's say you are a software developer, what are some words that would be relevant to you? It could be bug or debug or push to production or fix these issues. Or my personal favorite, I'm not a developer, have you tried restarting your computer? So these are relevant words. If you actually have a clear goal, you're a developer who wants to be able to speak more fluently and naturally in English, you need to focus on learning these words inside out. Of course, you can learn words about dragons, dungeons, elephants, or giraffes, but save it for later. If you are a professional who urgently need to use English in your life for work or maybe for socializing, make sure that you apply to my coaching program, English Sprint Academy, and I will give you a lot more of a personal guidance there. If you want to increase the chances of actually remembering these words in the long term, you need to get in the habit of learning words in context and using them in context. What does that mean? So context is basically extra information or situation that surrounds the words. For example, let's take the same example. You are a software developer and you just learned these two new words, debug and push to production. So you have learned that the definition of each is debugging means identifying and fixing errors in code, whereas push to production means that you are uploading code to live servers. So you know the definition, but that's not where it stops. If you learn this way, what you're doing is just connecting definition to these words, but you don't really know how and when to use them. So after you know the definition, what you need to do is to imagine yourself using them in your day-to-day life. You can maybe think of a situation where you're venting to your colleague next to you saying, "Oh my God, I spent the entire morning debugging a login issue in our API." Or maybe you can think of, for the push to production, you would think, "I'm going to push the new version to production tomorrow." So the more relevant and personal the example is to your life, the better you remember. So this way, you're not just storing words and definition, you're storing words and you know exactly when to use them if you also think about the situation in which you want to use these words. So have you ever done this before? Comment down below. So let's talk about the second R, and that is repetition. So even if, let's say, you're learning words that are useful and relevant to you, it's difficult to really remember it if you've only seen these words once. Your brain needs to see these words repeatedly for it to go like, "Oh, I see this so often. It must be important, and therefore I need to remember it and learn it." But the thing is, repetition doesn't always happen by accident. You do need to create it. And there are two types of repetition that you need. First, it's repeated exposure or input. So you need to be able to see or read or hear these words repeatedly from various sources, like videos or audio podcasts or even text through articles or books. and repeated usage. And this is the output part. So you need to use this word repeatedly through speaking, through writing, or even through thinking in English. So when both of these repetitions happen consistently, your brain is starting to recognize these words as relevant and useful. And it is also a way for you to start thinking of this word not just as a passive vocabulary where you just understand but never use it, but it's also going to become an active vocabulary, words that you can use confidently and naturally in your daily life. So let's talk about repeated exposure. So let's use the example that we used before. If you're a software developer trying to improve your English, trying to expand your vocabulary, you need to start watching a lot of content or reading content about your field. So find YouTube videos or find articles online that you can start consuming with the intention of expanding your vocabulary. This is inevitable. Okay, so of course you can do all of these obvious things, but what you can also do is to start being active in online communities where developers hang. So this could be, Reddit threads or Stack Overflow or GitHub. So the more you read, the more you listen, the more you participate in these discussions, the more you're gonna start noticing patterns or repeated words or phrases that you can start using in your daily life, things that are relevant to you. So that is one way, but there's also another targeted way, which is using ChatGPT. You can ask ChatGPT to explain a concept, a situation, or processes in your related field of work using the words that you're trying to learn. You can even ask ChatGPT to turn this explanation into a short story or example conversation. And this way you're creating your own content where your target words show up naturally. And this creates like a custom-made exposure, designed for your level and for your need. And now repeated usage, which is the output part, and you need to use this repeatedly for these words to stick. And we already talked about it in the first example on how you can use it. Of course, you can start using it by imagining a situation where you use these words, or you can try to use it using ChatGPT. Ask ChatGPT to, let's say, pretend to be your colleague where you're trying to discuss problems that you are facing using these terms. And then you can simulate a conversation with it so that you can have an excuse to use these words in order to remember it better. The key is that do not let these words die in your notebook or your notes app. You need to bring them to life as much as possible. So to conclude the video, in order for you to really remember a word, you need to remember the 2R, relevance and repetition. Is the word relevant enough to what you need? And do you see this word often enough? So thank you for watching this video. I will see you next time where I will be talking about using ChatGPT to help your language learning process. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and like it. I'll see you next time and good luck. Bye.